Well, Daniel, there are over 40 different loss events that we can all expect. Hopefully, we won't get all of them. The main ones are a loss of a loved one, a divorce, a separation, a job loss, your health, your wealth, your pets. And over the last few years, during the pandemic, a lot of the minor ones came to the forefront. Loss of freedom, loss of choice, loss of status, identity, changing work conditions, recreational and social activities. So there are a lot of losses, and because most of us think loss is a death of a loved one, which it is, they don't understand when these other loss events comes into their lives that they are actually going through a grieving process for that person, place or thing that they have just lost.
I like how you say a person, a place, or a thing, because I have seen people grieve more for their animals than for their family members.
Yeah.
I've
But
seen
let's
people.
face it, your animals are the unconditional love that we all desire in our life. They're the ones that are there for you. They're the ones that greet you like you're the best thing on earth. And imagine living your life not talking, not actually saying, oh my God, that was so silly what you just did. I cannot believe you said that, or I cannot believe you're behaving like that. So they are our unconditional love relationships, and that's why when they do pass, we do miss them and we spend so much more time with them, especially if we're working from home and our animals are with us.
Well, I've got three. I've got two British short hairs, two beautiful cats, and a French bulldog. And
Yeah.
those animals are with us more than our children are. And the British Shorthair, our first one, I purchased for my wife back in 2010. And the day that I gave my wife our first British Shorthair was the day that she was involved in an aircraft accident.
Oh,
So through her grieving period of being injured and then also losing her job, the number one thing that was with her for 24 hours a day was the cat.
yeah.
And she says, the cat knows all the secrets that I haven't told you. And I remember when she was crying one day, very emotional, the cat's there licking
Yeah.
out the tear.
Oh, they so understand, and they have premonitions too. They know something's going to happen before it actually happens. So yeah, they're very very psychic and they're very aware. Their
Wow.
intuition is top notch.
Wow. In terms of things that people have lost, what are some of those things that they've lost during the pandemic and that period of COVID that we went through?
Yeah, well, no matter what reason people come to me to move beyond loss, when we go through the process, which is a 5-step process that I assist people through, the number one loss that always comes up in that process is loss of identity. And we come into this world perfect. And through the growing process and through life, we slowly start to lose a little bit of who we are. And, not intentionally from the people who have said things like, don't act like that, don't be that person, don't do that. I can remember when I first started my corporate career, constantly by well-meaning advice, men would always say to me, don't act like that, Karen, if you want to get ahead. Don't be that woman, don't do this, all these sort of things. And then I slowly, more and more and more, became this person who wasn't me at my heart. So your loss of identity is the number one thing. And you think about it, you think, who are you? And we wear so many hats throughout a day. But so often we see ourselves as that professional person, whoever that is, whatever our expertise is. People always say, one of the first things I'll say when you meet me is, what do you do? As opposed to, who are you? And how do you live your life? And how many different hats do you wear in a day? So loss of identity was one of the major ones. Also the loss of freedom and the loss of status. Because all of a sudden we're not going into the office where we have, our office or this or that and all those sort of things. And socially, we are social beings, and we found it hard to not to be able to just go down the road and catch up with friends and do all these other things. So they're the major things that people lost. And I feel a lot of people went into isolation because they didn't have those things, because all of a sudden they have these extra hours in every day. How do I fill that time without just sitting on the couch watching Netflix for that whole time?
I remember during the pandemic, an engineer said to me, he said, Daniel, the only thing that I got after 30 years of working in corporate was bad health and a lack of awareness of who I am. And he really struggled with that identity piece, because when he was an engineer, he had the business card to prove it. He had the office to go to reinforce it every day, and then he surrounded himself by other engineers.
Yeah.
Once he stopped doing that, he didn't know who he was. And for the following 6 months, he really struggled to figure that out. He knew his role in business, but who he was as a person was quite confusing. So as he looked out there into the future, there was no dreams, there was no hopes, there was no wishes, there was no desires. And for the ones that he had in the past, they kind of all disappeared when he lost his job and he lost his comfortable stream of income.
Yeah.
And he had to reinvent himself. And through that period of time, it was difficult. And I think at the end he gave up hope and said, well, this is just too hard. I'll just try to get my old job back.
Yeah,
But
which
then
is
back
really
in there-
sad. Really, and I can identify. I did exactly the same thing when I chose redundancy from my much-loved CFO role of a publicly listed company, and when they were merging with another. And, you know, I remember not long after coming home and looking in the mirror and going, I don't even like who you are. Like, you're angry, you're overweight, there's nothing you got going for you at the moment. And what has happened to you? What happened to that fun, loving, positive person that you used to be? And that's why people struggle with that loss of identity. You know, there I was, I had a master's degree in accounting, I was a CPA, I had all of these accolades, you know, I even had this 5-page letter from my former CEO telling me how amazing I was and how I was the oracle of the company and all of these things. And then it was just literally like, what am I going to do? Like, who am I? You know, and probably 2 years earlier, Dan, my 27-year-old son, my baby by a minute, had passed away, and, you know, I had just shoved all that down, and I literally was so proud of myself. I went back to work the day after his funeral. How amazing is that? And how, in hindsight, how disrespectful is that? And it was absolutely disgusting. And that's probably why, when I decided to become a life coach, I was guided towards loss. Because most of us do not have an idea on what to do when loss comes to visit. We know how to go into avoidance, we know how to go into isolation, but we don't know how to process what has happened so that we can find the gifts in what has happened. And when I say the gifts, I don't mean the actual loss event. Like, there is no gift in Dan passing. There is no gift in me losing my job, which I so loved. But the gift came after, in who you become when you actually get yourself back on track for your life plan. And we may not be conscious of what our life plan, but we all had a life plan when we came down here. Whether you believe that or not, it doesn't really matter. But there is some way that we were going to live this life and learn lessons, and we learn so many lessons from our losses. If we choose to dive into them, if we choose not to drown the emotions through any of our avoidance tactics, which, you know, we're all so good at doing. We know how to do that. But when we dive into them and we find out what those messages are, and those emotions are full of messages. They are energy in motion. They come in, they give you a message, and then they go out. But most of us are not listening to them. So when we can find that message and become that person who we came here to be, that's where we unwrap all of those gifts in what has happened. And if we don't, we just keep repeating the same old loss, 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 loss. That's why people are married 3, 4 times to the same person in a different body, because they haven't learnt that lesson.
Going back to when you lost your son, Dan, you mentioned that you'd repressed the emotions. You went back to work the day after the funeral. When you look back at the loss, what range of emotions and behaviours had you actually gone through? Now that you've had time to process it, what were you actually doing behind the repression?
Well, I was definitely drinking and eating and working way too much. But apart from that, the anger, I was so angry at him. He didn't commit suicide, or he didn't, and I shouldn't say commit suicide, because it's not an act. He did not suicide, but he did drink himself. You know, at 27, he had drank way too much. But what actually killed him, and we found him at our back door on Sunday morning, thinking a healthy 27-year-old had gone out the night before. But when he came home, he fell over, and he lived under our house with his girlfriend, and they'd gone out separately. That when he came home, everything shook up as he fell over, but it was his lungs that actually failed him, and he couldn't catch his breath. And he had pneumonia 2 years earlier when he'd been in Scotland, spent a week in hospital. They said that his lungs were so bad that if he had smoked full on for, say, 10, 12 years, which he hadn't, he couldn't have done a quarter of the damage to the lungs. But, you know, I was angry at him for not looking after himself. I was angry at me for not looking after him as a mother. And I guess you just shove it down. My husband and I, we grieve so differently. He just wanted to sit and be quiet, and he'd probably still be sitting, 12 years on if he could have. Whereas I was like, no, we have to do things. We were living in Sydney at the time, and we had 2 sons on the Gold Coast. We had to get them down there. We had to get the family together. But yeah, it's just how you shove it all down. And I knew that anger was really inside of me a lot, and I made a lot of silly decisions probably for that 2 years after Dan passed. The best decision I made was choosing redundancy. That was not a silly decision, but there was a lot of things that I did that were so unlike me, but it was just easier to just go, I don't care, sort of thing. But yeah, and I didn't listen. I didn't listen to a lot of people, but yeah, my beyond loss process, which I call the gift of loss, is a 5-step process. And the first step is to stop. And I think that's the biggest mistake that most of us make, is we don't stop. We just, we live and we follow the old adage of keep busy, give it time, everything will be all right. But that's not how it is. We really do need to stop. We need to stop, and we really do need to start asking ourselves some really deep and meaningful questions. And, one of them is, what does this mean for me now? And what does that mean for me moving forward? Because we really do need to do that. And we may think that's a selfish thing, but it's not. Because it's really important that we understand that to honour the person, place or thing that we have lost, is we really do need to allow those emotions to come in. And until we stop, we don't. We can't. Because we're just shoving them down with whatever avoidance tactics we want to. And people, they think that they say the right things, but they don't. It's incredible how we think we're, giving out sorry for our loss. Like, that is one thing. I know I said it to people before Dan passed. I will never, ever say that to people, and it really irritates me, to the point that when you see it on TV shows, when the police walk into whatever home to inform them of someone's loss, they say it in such a way, it's just like, tick the box. Sorry for your loss. Right, now, we know, you know what I mean? And they just go on, and it's just such, well, I've said that, so now I can move on. Whereas a nicer thing,
Displayed empathy.
yeah, there is no empathy in it. You know, my heartfelt condolences just means so much more than that. But it's about people actually being honest and saying something along the lines of, I have no idea what you're going through, but I'm here for you. I don't, in any way that you want me to be. And I don't want to put any pressure on you for you to tell me how to be here for you. But, you know, I'm here. I'm here to listen. And that's probably what most people want, is just someone to listen to them. Not to respond, just so they can get all of these emotions out. And the best way to get them out is through talking, because when you get it out of your head or out of your body, they always seem and sound different to what goes on in your head. I've got a great spiritual mentor, and she calls that the itty bitty shitty committee. And it's so true. So true that, and when you get it out, you can actually go, oh yeah, right, that's not as bad as what I thought. Or, okay, now I know what I'm looking at, so now I can devise a plan for that way forward.
When you were going through your loss of Dan and working with other people, what are some of these crazy things that people say? Those things that you hear, like sorry for your loss. It just wasn't.
There's so many of them. There's so many of them. I had a lady actually walk up to me at Dan's wake, and she was just ignorant. She did not know. But she said to me, it's really good you have other children. And I'm like, what? Like, all of a sudden you've just downgraded Dan to being lesser of my other 3 children, you know, which this made no sense to me at all. But people do just say whatever they can, and it's a reflection of them, and it's a reflection of their ignorance when it comes to loss. And I do call that a lack of loss intelligence. And most of us have it because we don't want to think about loss. We don't want to even think about our own death. And we're just too busy going along. Whereas the Bhutanese people, right, and you're probably aware of them, they have this amazing tradition that they start meditating on their death from a very young age, from around 4. Which is really it sounds a bit morbid in the West, but when you think about it, when you've actually meditated on your death, you're not scared of it. You're not in fear of it. You actually know what's going to happen. So you then live your life. And they are one of the happiest people in the world. So it just makes sense that, like, when you actually understand that we are all here for a finite time, and the best we can make of our finite time is the way to live our lives, because no one has an expiry date on their birth certificate. So we don't know when that's going to come. You know, Dan was only 27, and you know, both of my grandmothers passed in their early 90s. My mother passed in her early 90s. My dad passed around 77. But we have a long family history of being, you know, well into our 80s and 90s. And that's when I expect to actually be around for as well. So it's really young to pass before you're even into your 3rd act, so to speak. And people need to understand that whatever you say is a reflection of you. And if you don't know what to say, and the majority of us have no idea what to say, just be honest and just say.
I'll give you an honest one. I was at my grandfather's funeral, and one of his business associates was there, and he came up to me and he said, you know, Daniel, I don't want to piss in your pocket. He said, but your grandfather loved calling you Daniel Boone. And he said, I'd like to continue the tradition and be the only one who can call you Daniel Boone. And for me, that was the most disrespectful thing that I could hear.
Really?
And the only thing I could say to him was, well, you better get your dick out of my pocket because you're pissing in it right now. And I felt scammed. I was like, this is the biggest rip-off. That's what my grandfather called me. This guy over here has no entitlement at all.
Exactly.
Get your dick out of my pocket. Stop pissing in it. And I
Exactly.
remember it good today. I forget the funeral, but I just remember that guy's face and how he said it to me. Oh, one day. One day when I'm bigger. 30 years later. It's crazy what people say, and they do need to stop, pause and think. And the Bhutanese, I practice the same philosophy with myself. I believe that I can live forever.
Yeah.
And I believe that this moment can be my last as well. And I'm constantly looking for that balance. But the conversation of loss is not always popular. I attempt to talk to my children about it because when I was at school, I remember I was supposed to go on a holiday. And my friend said, hey, we're going to go to Queensland for holidays. We want you to come with the family. Got super excited. You go through the school term. The day comes to go on holidays. You know what? I've changed my mind. I don't want to go. And so for me, I changed my mind. And then I was at home and I was watching the television and I saw this car accident at Armidale on the way to Queensland. I thought to myself, that looks exactly like my friend's car.
Oh my God.
And so I went over to my parents' house and I said, Mum, I was just watching the television. She said, that was the car that you're supposed to be on. And I just collapsed. I fainted.
Yeah.
Because of the emotion. And I blanked out and I really forgot that moment for a long time. But I remember struggling with the loss.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to say to the parents. I didn't know what to say to the father. The mother passed away. The cousin passed away. My best friend passed away. And I didn't know what to say. So I just kept my mouth zipped. But nobody talked me through the conversation. So for many years, I'd had that loss and I thought, was it because of me? If I would have just gone, maybe they would have come by my house and we would have gone a different road. So it was that survivor guilt that started to kick in.
I can imagine that. Yeah.
And for many years, it plays on your mind. The should-ofs and the could-ofs.
Yeah.
And I saw that in my behaviours. Knowing what you now know and your 5-step program, what's the best way for people to move beyond loss on anything that's people, place or things?
They have to go through it. They have to go through the emotions. And they have to go through the relationship that they've just lost. And, there are 3 aspects to every relationship. There's the physical aspect, which is the things we do, the things we say, the things that, the way we touch each other. And then there's the emotional side of the relationship, where, how we were touched by each other and the reason why the relationship, the emotional side of the breakdown of it. And, it could be death or it could be through divorce or, job loss. So you've got to understand that emotional side. And then the third aspect is that spiritual aspect. And most people don't understand the spiritual side. We know that we're connected, but we don't understand why we are so deeply connected. So you've got to dive into the whole 3 of them. And whenever loss comes, it's the physical aspect that you have lost. The emotional and the spiritual will live on forever. And it's the emotional that causes us to grieve. So the more that you dive into the relationship, and the process is we actually do a timeline on the relationship, which is amazing, looking at the highs and the lows of it. And no matter what relationship there is, there are highs and lows, and you've got to be honest. And you've got to come to a place where you can apologise, forgive, and acknowledge. And through that, it's an amazing healing process that you come to, and you learn so many lessons from it. And you then will come up with a list of things that you'll stop doing, things that you'll start doing, and things that you'll continue to do. Because it's about the next relationship on a similar scale. And I always liked Dr. DeMartini. He always said that you never lose anyone. Like, if someone will come in to replace that in your life, and when you understand that, I'm not talking about an emotional relationship. Someone could come in and take over that part of your emotional side. It doesn't have to be a sexual relationship. And it's interesting when you look at it that, and you can go, right, so then when that person does come in, I need to make sure that you know, from my side, I'm better. I'm better because of this loss. But you can only understand all of that by going through it. And I'm not going to lie to you, it's not easy. It's not easy at all. But it's so rewarding. It's so rewarding because you're growing. And that's what our life is about. Is for us to have lessons and to learn and to grow and to understand that when you go through this process, it's you have this formula that you can use for the rest of your life. So you don't have to go down into the deep, deep lows of grief and loss. You can if you want to, but you don't need to, because you can do this process quite quickly. And you get those messages, and then you can come back. And, you know, I like to think that life follows the patterns of our heartbeat. You know, if you look at a monitor, it's up and down and up and down. And that's what gives our life the richness, because we all know what that straight line means. So if you're not having a life where you do have ups and downs, you may as well be dead, because there's nothing to learn from and there's nothing to look forward to. So, yeah, it's just a beautiful process. And you're not on the couch and you're not going over it and over it and over it forever and ever and ever. And not that I'm taking anything away from counsellors or psychiatrists or psychologists, but, you know, we all have so much in our lives that we can learn from and grieve and go through. And you know, what I've found is that first 10 years of our life, definitely up into 18, but those first 10 years in our lives, we form so many beliefs which are not our beliefs. They're probably not serving us. And we create these scenarios in our lives, and until we go in and we figure that out and go through it all, it's really interesting that we make decisions based on those beliefs. And we then find out as we get older, they weren't even true. They weren't even mine. And I've lived my life based on that up until now. So it's a process that I really do wish that we could give as part of, say, year 12. Okay, let's clear up the last 18 years, right? Before you go out into adulthood, let's have a look at what's been going on in your life and the beliefs you've formed and how we can shed a different light on it. Because as an adult, you'll look back and you'll go, oh, wow, how did I form that opinion? You know, very quickly, I can remember I was like 4. And I'm one of 7 children. I'm the third eldest. There were 6 girls, and then 5 years later, a boy. And at this stage, they had the 6 girls, and we were living in a 2-bedroom house, but it was a double block. And my dad was setting up his business, which was he bought and sold Caterpillar tractor parts. And he was working out of, you know, the backyard and whatnot, working from home, as we'd say now. And I used to be his little helper. I used to go down and, you know, Kaz, pass me this. You know, I knew all of the tools and I'd pass him this. And then one day I made a mistake and he got really angry because it cost him a lot of time and he had to have this finished by a certain time to deliver it or whatever. Get up in the house, I don't want to see your face. And then the next day he sent me away. And I was like, oh, God, I really did make a mistake. So I carried that belief for like nearly 50 years. And my relationship with my dad was never that great. And it certainly didn't help when I got pregnant at 16, which made it a little bit worse sort of thing. But then when I did this process, I actually got through the middle of it. Oh my God, he never sent me away. He sent me to school. But in my mind, I had connected all of those things and came up with the belief my dad didn't love me. He sends me away when I do things wrong.
Mistakes equals love withheld.
Yeah.
And punishment. To be banished.
Exactly. So my dad doesn't love me, love withheld. Is that maybe why I got pregnant at 16? Could be. Not that I'm blaming him. It was my choice. But if you know what I mean, we carry these beliefs forward and we make choices based on them. That's why I think if we could just clear everyone up at 18 It's like giving him the rinse cycle. Let's just make sure your beliefs are actually yours. Are they serving you, and are they actually right from what has happened? So yeah, does that all make sense?
It does. With our motor vehicles, we get them serviced every 10,000, 15,000 kilometres.
Yeah,
We get
exactly.
new tyres, new clutches, new brakes. We retint the windows. We fix up the bumpers, but we don't always treat ourselves like that. And
No.
I believe it's so important. And something you mentioned before triggered a thought: physical, emotional, and spiritual. One
Yeah.
of my friends, she lost her son, and he must have been about 18. And for 15 years, she was very angry at him because he had passed away. And while she used all of that energy to be angry at him, she was never able to love him. And it was once she had an emotional release that she realised it was the first time in 15 years she was able to love the departed.
Yeah.
And she said at that stage, once she let go of the anger, she then was able to continue the spiritual relationship with him. Because she says, he'll always be my baby boy. And
Yeah.
I've got all of those wonderful memories back into my awareness where when I had anger, I repressed the love. And I could only think about those angry things and the things that he did wrong and how he departed. But once she dealt with the anger towards him and towards herself, all the things that she could have done, she would have done, once she cleared that up, she could then get the love back and
Yeah.
continue that relationship. So I can see that physical, emotional, and spiritual.
Anger and love cannot exist in the same environment, and anger only hurts you. It is disease forming, and the more angry we are, the more we got to feed into it. Where is it in our body? Understand that anger so we can release it. And more often than not, we're angry at ourselves. But yeah, it's very sad when people cannot have a relationship with their dearly departed. Like, Dan's the co-founder of the Chaston Centre. He is my guide. He is constantly showing me that he is with me. I give him credit for all my books, the programs, everything. And I honestly believe that we agreed to this so I could become who I am today and do what we're doing. And it's really horrible. And I'd love to have him here and, being married and getting a house and children just like his siblings are doing. But it's the way it is. But we still do. He shows me signs every day that he's around, and he comes in different forms. And on the day of his funeral, when we were driving from the place where we had the service to the wake, I reckon probably 10 of the people who were there, and there was over like 150 people there, came up to me and said, "Did you see those Dan number plates when we were driving here?" There were so many Dan number plates on the road that day. I've seen Dan. I've been in New Zealand, and I've seen Dan as I was walking with a friend, on the cement, just, etched into the cement. It shows up all the time to show me that he's always around and he's always there in some way.